September 1986, a Soviet command bunker near the Afghan-Pakistani border. The air is thick with dust and the scent of stale sweat. A field telephone whines on a wooden table. Maps of the Parachinar region, marked with red arrows and defensive circles, are pinned to rough-hewn walls. A Soviet GRU military advisor, his uniform darkened at the collar, stares at a series of black and white aerial photographs. They are still damp from the developing solution. His finger traces a line across the image, the Duran line, the contested border. Then it stops. He leans closer, his brow furrowed. The photograph shows the Jawa Khili cave complex, a sprawling Mujahideen stronghold carved into the mountains of Pakistan. A site his Spetsnaz teams had watched for months. A site considered untouchable. But something is different. A new crater, geometrically perfect, stares back from the film. It is not the ragged, scattered pattern of a MiG bombing run or the fiery chaos of a rocket barrage. This is a single, deep and devastatingly precise puncture directly over a reinforced tunnel entrance. The surrounding terrain is eerily undisturbed. He slides another photo beside it. A second crater, identical in its surgical nature. A third, each one a bullseye on a high-value target. A command post, a weapons cache entrance, a repair workshop. He exhales, a slow, measured sound in the quiet bunker. He looks up at a junior officer, his voice low, stripped of its usual authority, edged with something colder, the first tremor of understanding. This is impossible. Yet the photographic evidence lies before him. A new equation of destruction has been written onto the battlefield, and for the first time, he is reading it in a language he does not fully understand. To understand the shock in that bunker, one must first understand the war that built it, a conflict defined by its brutal, grinding asymmetry. December 24th, 1979. The Soviet 40th Army begins crossing the Amu Darya River on pontoon bridges. Beneath the rumble of BMD infantry fighting vehicles and the clatter of tank treads, the operation is codenamed Storm 333, a clinical, swift decapitation of the Afghan government in Kabul. The Politburo envisions a limited contingent, a show of fraternal force to secure a compliant socialist state on its southern flank. They anticipate a campaign measured in months. They are committing to a war that will last a decade. The initial military success is overwhelming. Soviet motorized rifle divisions seize key cities and highways. The Afghan army, the DRA, is purged and propped up. But the occupation, swift in execution, is blind to the terrain it seeks to control. Afghanistan is not the plains of Eastern Europe. It is a nation of soaring, barren mountains, labyrinthine gorges, and isolated valleys, a geography that neutralizes mechanized advantage and favors the indigenous fighter. The resistance forms not as a unified army, but as a constellation of local militias, the Mujahideen. They are farmers, shepherds, and clerics, bound by Pashtunwali code and Islamic faith, led by charismatic warlords like Ahmad Shah Massoud in the Panjshir Valley and Jalaluddin Haqqani in the eastern regions. Their tactics are ancient and effective: ambush, sabotage, and fade. They strike convoys on the Salang Pass, mine roads, and snipe at isolated outposts before dissolving into the landscape they know as intimately as their own breath. The Soviet response is dictated by a doctrine forged in the colossal battles of the Great Patriotic War. They apply overwhelming firepower. MiG-21 and Su-25 jets scream down valleys, dropping iron bombs and napalm, 7mm machine guns and S-5 rocket pods. Artillery battalions pound grid coordinates into dust. It is a war of statistics. Body counts, sorties flown, rubles spent. But the metrics are deceptive. For every Mujahideen fighter killed, 2 more take his place, fueled by a deepening hatred of the foreign invader. The indiscriminate violence intended to pacify instead fuels a perpetual cycle of recruitment and revenge. The Soviet soldier, the desantnik or motostrelok, finds no front line, sees no conventional enemy. He guards a lonely outpost, watches a hillside for movement, and rides in convoys that are rolling coffins, waiting for the blast of a landmine or the crack of a rifle from an unseen ridge. By the mid-1980s, a strategic stalemate has solidified. The Soviets control the urban centers and major arteries, but the countryside and the mountains belong to the resistance. The war becomes a bleeding ulcer for the USSR, sapping morale, resources, and international standing. Yet in the halls of the Kremlin and the headquarters of the 40th Army in Kabul, there remains a grim confidence. They hold the conventional power. They command the skies. That confidence is first cracked not by a bomb, but by a whisper. A new weapon begins to appear in the hands of the Mujahideen. It is shoulder-fired, tube-like, and terrifyingly simple to use. The American-made FIM-92 Stinger surface-to-air missile. With its infrared seeker and fire-and-forget capability, it transforms the Mujahideen from hunted to hunter. The Soviet helicopter pilot, once the master of the low-altitude domain, now flies in constant dread of the telltale whoosh and the unblinking eye of the seeker head, chasing his exhaust. Fixed-wing aircraft are forced higher, their bombing accuracy plummeting as they flee the lethal envelope below 10,000 feet. The Stinger is a tactical revolution, but it is a defensive one. It denies the Soviets the sky, but does not in itself deliver a decisive offensive blow. The Mujahideen can now survive and move more freely, but to win, they need to strike, not just endure. They need a sanctuary, a place to gather, train and marshal the vast river of weapons flowing from the outside world. And that sanctuary lies just across a border the Soviets have been ordered not to violate. That sanctuary was Pakistan. More specifically, the federally administered tribal areas, FATL, along the Durand Line, a porous, mountainous border drawn by a British diplomat in 1893, dividing the Pashtun tribes but never their loyalties. For the Mujahideen, this was not a foreign country. It was an extension of their homeland. Here, under the vigilant protection of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, the ISI, a vast logistical ecosystem bloomed. Refugee camps in Peshawar and Quetta swelled into bustling political and military headquarters for the 7 major Mujahideen parties. Camps near the border, like those around Miram Shah, became training grounds where CIA and ISI instructors taught sabotage, communications, and the use of advanced weapons. Mule trains and Toyota pickup trucks formed a relentless caravan, moving Kalashnikovs, mortars, Chinese rockets, and finally, Stingers, from warehouses in Pakistan through mountain passes into the heart of Afghanistan. This cross-border pipeline was the central nervous system of the resistance, and its most critical node was Jawar Kili. Located just over 15 miles inside Pakistani territory in the Khost province region, Jawar was not a simple cave. It was a fortress complex engineered with monumental effort. What began as a few natural caverns had been expanded over years into a sprawling, multi-story underground base. Tunnels, some wide enough to drive trucks through, extended nearly half a mile into the limestone mountainside. It housed barracks, a mosque, a hotel for visiting dignitaries, a garage with a repair workshop, a medical clinic, a radio communications center, and vast storage chambers for munitions and food. Above-ground anti-aircraft gun emplacements and sentry posts guarded the approaches. It was effectively an insurgent military base, with the permanence and utility of a Soviet outpost. For the Soviet High Command and their DRA allies, Jawar was an obsession and an open wound. It was the launchpad for attacks on the critical Afghan garrison at Khost, which had been under effective siege for years. Convoys trying to resupply Khost along the Gardez-Khost highway, dubbed the Highway of Death, were ambushed by fighters flowing from Jawar. The complex symbolized the unbearable contradiction of their war. They faced a professionalized, externally supplied enemy who could retreat to a sovereign sanctuary where they were legally untouchable. Direct ground assaults were attempted, not by Soviets, but by DRA forces, with Soviet planning and close air support. The battles of Jawar in 1985 and 1986 were bloody fiascos. DRA troops fought bravely but were mauled by defenders dug into pre-sighted positions. Soviet air power pounded the mountain, but dumb bombs could not seal the deep tunnels. The attackers were always driven back, leaving behind equipment and dead, while the Mujahideen simply retreated deeper into their labyrinth, repaired the superficial damage, and continued their operations. The message was searingly clear. Conventional military power, as applied by the USSR, had reached its logical and humiliating limit. They could bombard, they could assault, but they could not eliminate. The strategic initiative, enabled by that porous border, belonged to the Mujahideen and their patrons. For the United States through the CIA and for Pakistan's ISI, the success was intoxicating but fraught with risk. The Stinger had leveled the aerial playing field. Now they sought a tool to escalate, to demonstrate not just defensive resilience, but offensive precision. They needed to show the Soviets and the Mujahideen that the sanctuary itself could be violently, surgically breached. The goal was not just to destroy a base, but to shatter a psychological assumption of safety. The instrument for this message would not be a proxy fighter with a shoulder-fired missile. It would be the most advanced fighter aircraft in Pakistan's arsenal, flown by its most elite pilots, employing a weapon whose existence was known but whose real-world accuracy was the stuff of wary speculation in Soviet intelligence reports: the laser-guided bomb. The stage was now set. In Moscow and Kabul, frustration festered into a desperate need for new solutions. In Langley and Islamabad, a plan for a calculated, spectacular demonstration was taking shape. All threads of the war, technology, strategy, politics, and raw defiance were converging on a single point in the mountains of Pakistan. The silent, watching analysts in the Soviet bunker were about to receive their first bewildering data point from this new equation of war. The weapon that would rewrite the rules of engagement over Jawakili was born not in the mountains of Afghanistan, but in the laboratories and testing ranges of 1960s America, forged in the unforgiving crucible of another failed war, Vietnam. The problem was ancient and persistent: accuracy. In Vietnam, American pilots flew into storms of anti-aircraft artillery and surface-to-air missiles to drop unguided or dumb bombs. The statistical reality was stark. To have a high probability of destroying a hardened point target like a bridge or a command bunker, it required delivering a massive volume of ordnance, often hundreds of bombs from multiple aircraft. This meant higher risk to aircrew, more sorties, colossal expenditure of munitions, and devastating collateral damage. On a bomb's circular error, probable, CEP, the radius within which half of the bombs would fall, could be hundreds of feet. Missing a strategic target meant returning tomorrow to face the same gauntlet again. The solution emerged from a deceptively simple principle. If a bomb could be guided to its target after release, rather than being merely aimed at the moment of drop, accuracy could be revolutionized. The key was laser designation. A designator on the ground or in an accompanying aircraft would paint the target with a focused, pulsed laser beam. This was the Paveway series. The early Paveway I GBU-1 kits, fielded in Vietnam in 1968, were crude but transformative. They consisted of a standard Mech 84 2,000-pound bomb or a M117 750-pound bomb fitted with a seeker head and foldable, computer-controlled tail fins. The results, though primitive by later standards, were shocking. Where dozens of sorties might fail to take out a bridge, a single flight of 2 aircraft could now succeed, one to designate, one to drop the guided bombs. The Than Hoa Bridge, a notorious bridge too far that had survived over 800 sorties with conventional bombs, was finally crippled in 1972 with a handful of the earliest laser-guided bombs. The technology evolved rapidly. By the time it was being considered for use in Afghanistan, the Paveway 2 GBU-10 was the state-of-the-art. It featured improved, more sensitive seekers and a more reliable, modular design. Its CEP was no longer measured in hundreds of feet, but in meters. In ideal conditions, a skilled crew could place a bomb through a specific doorway or ventilation shaft. This was not area bombing. It was surgical strike capability. But the weapon system was only half of the equation. The delivery platform was equally critical. The bomb needed a modern jet capable of delivering it from high altitude, outside the range of most ground fire, with a stable platform for its targeting systems. That platform was the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. A lightweight, nimble, multi-role fighter, the F-16's avionics suite, including its Pavepenny laser spot tracker and its ability to integrate with ground designators, made it an ideal vector for this new form of warfare. Pakistan, a key frontline state, had begun receiving its first F-16s in 1983, and its most gifted pilots were trained in the United States. For the CIA and the Pakistani military, the pairing was obvious. They possessed the precise weapon and the perfect aircraft. What they needed was a target worthy of the demonstration. a target whose destruction would echo in Soviet headquarters in Kabul and in the Kremlin. They needed a concrete, mountainous symbol of insurgent invincibility. They needed Jawar Kili. The technological edge was sharpened, and the hand that would wield it was waiting for the command to strike. The decision to employ F-16s and laser-guided bombs against Jawar Kili was not a tactical whim. It was a coldly calculated strategic escalation, born from a confluence of pressures and opportunities in the war's 8th year. From the American perspective, the CIA's covert war, funneled through Pakistan's ISI, had achieved its primary objective, bogging down the Soviet Union in a costly, demoralizing quagmire. The Stinger's introduction in 1986 was a masterstroke, dramatically altering the air war's calculus. But Washington, particularly a Reagan administration riding a crest of Cold War confidence, sought more than a stalemate. They wanted to demonstrate tangible and so offensive momentum. They wanted to show their Pakistani allies, the Mujahideen, and most importantly the Soviets, that American technology could not only defend, but could also deliver decisive, punishing blows, deep within what the enemy considered a secure rear area. It was a message of qualitative superiority meant to corrode Soviet morale and will. For Pakistan, the stakes were even more immediate and existential. The Soviet occupation of Afghanistan was viewed in Islamabad as a direct geopolitical threat, a potential Soviet push toward the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. Pakistan's military ruler, General Zia-ul-Haq, had committed fully to the Mujahideen cause, but this came with severe risks. Soviet and DRA aircraft routinely violated Pakistani airspace in hot pursuit of Mujahideen. Border posts were shelled. The fear of a wider direct Soviet retaliation was a constant shadow in the halls of the GHQ in Rawalpindi. Striking Jawar with Pakistan's own premier aircraft was a daring assertion of sovereignty. It signaled that Pakistan would not just host the resistance, but would actively dismantle threats emanating from its own soil, and do so with a precision that minimized collateral damage and plausible deniability. It was a show of strength and capability to both the enemy and their own populace. The target selection was meticulous. Jawar Kili was ideal for this demonstration for multiple reasons. First, its military significance was undeniable. It was the linchpin of the logistics chain for the critical coast front. Destroying it would have immediate tactical benefits for the besieged DRA garrison. Second, its location inside Pakistan was a deliberate thumb in the eye to Soviet frustrations, proving their red lines could be crossed with impunity. Third, its hardened, tunnel-based construction made it the perfect test for the laser-guided bomb's unique capabilities. Dumb bombs had failed against it. Only precision munitions could hope to seal tunnels and destroy specific structures without leveling the entire mountainside. Finally, there was the psychological dimension. The raid was designed to be a spectacle of a new kind of power. It would not be a massive, chaotic bombardment, but a swift, clinical, and shocking display of technical mastery. The planners wanted the aftermath to look exactly as it would to the Soviet advisor in the bunker, a series of inexplicably perfect holes where key nodes of the complex used to be. The message was clear. We can see your most prized sanctuaries, we can hit them with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Nowhere is safe. This operation required seamless coordination, a triple handshake between the CIA, providing the bombs and intelligence, the Pakistani Air Force, providing the planes, pilots, and overall execution, and the Mujahideen forces on the ground, who would provide terminal laser designation and bear the brunt of any ground fighting to secure the target area. It was a high-wire act of covert collaboration, where trust in technology had to be absolute. A failure, a missed bomb, a shot-down F-16, would be a catastrophic propaganda victory for the Soviets. The strategic imperative was thus a fusion of demonstration, deterrence, and tactical gain. It was time to move the war into a new, more precise, and more terrifying phase. To comprehend the depth of Soviet disbelief, one must step inside the rigid hierarchical framework of Soviet military thought. The Red Army's doctrine was a product of its titanic victory in the Great Patriotic War, a conflict won by massed artillery, massed tank formations, and massed infantry assaults. Precision was a function of volume. If one artillery shell could not destroy a target, a battalion's worth could. This philosophy extended to its air power. The VVS, Soviet Air Force, was an instrument of the ground forces, its primary role being close air support and interdiction through saturation. A flight of Su-25 frogs or MiG-21 fish beds did not deliver a single bomb on a single point. They delivered a pattern of destruction across a target area. This doctrine shaped everything from training to procurement. Soviet pilots were not trained for pinpoint, single-pass strikes with guided munitions in complex, high-threat environments. Their avionics were robust and simple, designed for survivability in a massive continental war against NATO, not for delicate targeting. While the USSR had developed some precision-guided munitions like radio command-guided Kh-23, AS-7 Kerry missiles, they were niche systems, not integrated into the core of tactical aviation. The concept of a surgical strike as a standard tactical option was alien. Destruction was achieved through overwhelming application of firepower, a blunt instrument that reliably bludgeoned its objectives. This doctrinal mindset created a significant intelligence blind spot. Soviet military intelligence, the GRU and the KGB, were acutely aware of American advancements in precision guidance. They had technical specifications for the Paveway series. They understood the theory. But in the context of Afghanistan, they consistently underestimated its practical battlefield applicability. They dismissed it as a complex, weather-dependent technology unsuitable for the harsh, dusty environment of the Hindu Kush. More importantly, they could not conceive of it being entrusted to, or effectively used by, a non-state actors network. In their worldview, such advanced technology belonged to symmetrical state-level conflicts. Their assessment of the cross-border threat was filtered through this lens. They knew Jawar was vulnerable from the air, but they calculated its defense based on known parameters: massed anti-aircraft guns, the potential, though politically risky, use of their own fighter patrols near the border, and the sheer redundancy of its deep tunnel design. Their worst-case scenario was a large-scale conventional air raid by the Pakistani Air Force, an act of war they were prepared to detect, respond to, and propagandize against. They expected noise, fury, and visible, repairable damage. They were monitoring Jawar, but they were looking for the wrong signature. Their reconnaissance flights and signals intelligence were tuned to detect the preparations for a major offensive, the movement of large Mujahideen formations, or the assembly of a conventional bombing package. The idea that a decisive blow could be delivered by 2 aircraft on a single, fleeting mission fell outside their operational calculus. It was tactically invisible. Furthermore, the Soviet command was grappling with a paralyzing political constraint. The strict order from Moscow was to avoid direct, attributable clashes with Pakistan. Hot pursuit was one thing. A planned deep strike into Pakistani territory was another. This constraint bred a form of institutional frustration that, perversely, reinforced their blind spot. Because they could not strike across the border in force, they unconsciously assumed their adversary would operate under similar symmetrical restraints. They failed to fully internalize the asymmetric advantage their enemy held, the ability to use a sovereign nation's regular air force in a covert, deniable role. Thus, when the first reports filtered in, they did not compute. A single, perfect crater was an anomaly, perhaps a lucky hit or a structural collapse. 2 were a troubling coincidence. A pattern of them was a systemic shock. It represented not just a new weapon, but a fundamental challenge to their entire understanding of warfare. A challenge delivered not by a peer superpower on the plains of Europe, but by a seemingly backward insurgency in the mountains they thought they had mastered. Behind the cold mechanics of the laser guidance system and the strategic calculations in distant capitals were human beings operating at the razor's edge of technology and trust. In the cockpits of the Pakistan Air Force's PAF No. 9 Squadron Griffins at Sargodha Air Base, a select group of pilots received orders that were both an honor and a profound burden. These were not just any F-16 pilots. They were among the first and best trained, often having completed rigorous courses in the United States. They understood the capabilities of their aircraft and the Paveway bomb in a way few in the region did. Their mission profile was unlike anything in the PAF's standard playbook. It was a deep strike interdiction, but one requiring exquisite timing and faith in an unseen ally on the ground. They would ingress at high altitude, relying on the F-16's performance to keep them safe, release their laser-guided bombs based solely on a cue that a distant, invisible laser was painting the target, and egress without ever visually confirming the strike themselves. Theirs was an act of perfect procedural faith. On the ground in the jagged rocks overlooking the Jawar complex, a different team waited. This was a joint cell of Mujahideen technical specialists and likely CIA or ISI field advisors. Their tool was the AN-PAQ-1 laser target designator, a bulky tripod-mounted device that looked like a futuristic telescope. Their role was the most dangerous and precise of all. They had to infiltrate to a concealed vantage point with a direct line of sight to the pre-selected aim points, specific tunnel mouths, command bunkers, and workshop entrances. They had to remain undetected throughout the operation. At the exact appointed minute, they would place the crosshairs on the target and activate the laser, emitting a stream of coded pulses invisible to the naked eye. They had to hold that steady spot on the target, often under the very noses of sentries, for the critical 20-30 seconds of the bomb's terminal guidance. Their steady hand was the literal link between the strategy and the destruction. Meanwhile, inside Jawar, life followed the rhythm of a bustling insurgent base. Mujahideen fighters, mechanics, cooks and clerics moved through the tunnels. For them, the complex was a symbol of ultimate security. They had weathered Soviet bombings before. The scars on the mountainside were proof of their sanctuary's strength. The idea that a bomb could not just hit the mountain but could be guided into the mouth of their home was beyond their imagination. Their confidence was their vulnerability. And on the other side of the border, in the Soviet advisory posts and listening stations, were the Soviet technicians and officers, men like the GRU advisor in the bunker trained to analyze battlefield damage through a lens of known effects. Their expertise lay in identifying craters from 250's fab bombs, the impact patterns of S-5 rockets, or the scarring of napalm. Their reports fed directly into the Soviet military's understanding of enemy capabilities. They were the sensors of the 40th Army. When they witnessed the aftermath at Jawar, they were not just seeing destroyed structures, they were seeing their own professional reference library rendered obsolete. The emotional anchor here was not fear, but a profound professional disorientation. They were trained to quantify violence, and here was violence they could not quantify. This human chain, from the PAF pilot trusting his instruments, to the operative's steady hand on the laser designator, to the unsuspecting fighter in the tunnel, to the bewildered Soviet analyst, formed the complete circuit of this new form of warfare. The technological miracle of the laser-guided bomb was inert, without the skill and nerve of the people at both ends of the beam. The shockwave of the explosion would ripple through steel and rock, but the deeper tremor would run through the minds of every person touched by the event, each forced to recalibrate their understanding of what was possible in their war. The sky is a pale pre-dawn violet. On the tarmac at a forward operating base, 2 PAF F-16s stand loaded and silent. Beneath their wings hang the sleek, elongated forms of GBU-10 Paveway 2 laser-guided bombs, each a 2,000-pound Mk-84 warhead transformed into a thinking weapon. The pilots perform their final checks in the cockpits, the glow of instruments reflecting on their visors. There is no radio chatter about the mission's nature. Procedures are followed with a quiet intensity. Engine start is a rising whine that breaks the desert stillness. The fighters taxi, turn into the wind and accelerate down the runway, their afterburners punching them into the fading dark. The flight is a study in controlled audacity. They climb to high altitude not in a tactical terrain-hugging profile, but in a confident, direct line toward the border. Their altitude is their shield, placing them above the effective range of any anti-aircraft guns at Jawar and complicating any potential Soviet radar picture. In the cockpits, the pilots monitor their systems. The mission's success hinges on a seamless, silent ballet between air and ground, timed to the second. On the ground, in the rocks overlooking the Jawar-Kili Valley, the laser designation team is a statue of concentration. The AN-PAQ-1 is set, its cooling system humming faintly. Through the site, the complex is laid out like a model. The broad main tunnel entrance, the smaller auxiliary openings, the repaired structures from previous battles. Their fingers are near the activation switches. They listen for the coded signal over their secure radios, the only sound connecting them to the jets screaming in from the west. Around them, a security perimeter of Mujahideen fighters scans the approaches, their own nerves stretched taut. They are the bait and the shield. At the Soviet monitoring station just inside Afghanistan, the morning shift notes the routine Pakistani air activity. Radar blips appear, but they show no clear, aggressive intent. No low-level dash, no large formation. It could be a training flight, a patrol. The border is tense but quiet. The assumption of sanctuary holds. In the Jawar complex itself, the morning prayers have ended. Sentries pace their posts. Mechanics work on a truck in a cave mouth. The underground barracks are stirring. There is no alarm, no sense of impending singular catastrophe. The threat, in their experience, is either a distant jet too high to matter, or the thunderous but survivable chaos of a saturation raid. This moment feels like neither. Then the signal comes. A burst of static, a code word. On the mountainside, the designator operator exhales slowly. He centers the crosshairs on the first target, the reinforced arch of the main vehicle entrance. His thumb presses the trigger. An invisible, focused beam of laser light, pulsing with a specific code, lances out across the valley and paints the concrete and stone. To the naked eye, nothing has changed. At high altitude, the lead F-16 pilot receives confirmation. His systems are slaved to the laser's code. On his head-up display, cues align. The aircraft is in the basket, the cone in space where the bomb, once released, can acquire the laser energy and guide itself. There is no dramatic dive, no screaming attack run. The pilot maintains his course, his voice calm as he goes through the final switchology. A single dark shape detaches from the aircraft's wing pylon. The F-16, suddenly lighter, continues smoothly on its path. The bomb falls silently at first, a dead weight tumbling through the thin, cold air. Then its seeker head activates. It scans the Earth below, searching for the specific frequency of the reflected laser pulse. It finds it, a tiny, brilliant beacon amidst the rocky clutter. The seeker locks. In the tail, the guidance computer calculates the descent path. The small canards on the nose and the large control fins at the tail snap to life, making micro-adjustments. The bomb is no longer falling. It is flying. It corrects its trajectory, steering unerringly toward the source of the light. On the ground, the designator holds the spot. Steady. Steady. For the sentry at the main entrance, the first sign is a faint, whispering whistle that seems to come from directly overhead. He looks up. The 2,000-pound bomb, guided with an accuracy measured in single-digit meters, impacts not on the mountainside above the tunnel, but directly on the structural lip of the entrance itself. The explosion is a concentrated, cataclysmic thump that feels more like an earthquake than a blast. A fireball vomits from the mouth of the tunnel, followed instantly by a shockwave that flattens nearby structures and shreds anyone in the open. The overhang of rock, carefully engineered for defense, collapses in a roaring avalanche of shattered concrete and stone, sealing the primary artery of the complex. Before the dust from the first impact has even begun to settle, the designator's crosshairs are already moving. The laser beam dances to a new point, the roof of the underground repair workshop. High above, the second F-16 is already in its release window. The second bomb follows the first invisible thread of light down. The raid is over in minutes. The two F-16s, their ordnance gone, bank away and accelerate back to the west, leaving only the echoing thunder of the explosions rolling through the valleys. The laser designator team packs its equipment with urgent, silent efficiency and melts back into the landscape, their mission complete. Inside the Jawa complex, chaos is absolute, but it is a localized chaos. This is the second profound shock. A conventional saturation bombing would have left the entire mountainside smoking, with fires, debris and craters scattered across acres. The aftermath of the laser-guided strike is different. There is devastation, but it is specific. The main vehicle entrance is a sealed tomb of rubble. The repair workshop is a deep, smoking pit where its roof used to be. A third aim point, a communications and command bunker, has simply ceased to exist, replaced by a precise, cratered void. The paths between these points, the adjacent barracks, the mosque, the secondary tunnels, many are eerily intact. The violence has been distributed not widely but deeply at exact chosen nodes. Mujahideen survivors stagger from the dust, not to fight a ground assault that never comes, but to confront a baffling new reality. Their sanctuary has been violated not by a hammer but by a scalpel. The very architecture of their security, the deep tunnels, has been turned against them. The entrances are now their graves. The psychological impact is immediate and paralyzing. The complex is not just damaged. Its functional heart has been surgically removed. For the first time, the mountain feels not like a shield, but like a target. Word of the strike flashes through insurgent and intelligence networks. In Islamabad and Langley, there is a tense wait for battle damage assessment, BDA. Initial reports from agents on the ground are jubilant but cautious. Direct hits, tunnels collapsed, and the gamble appears to have paid off. But the most critical assessment is yet to come. It begins with the aerial reconnaissance sorties. Within hours, perhaps a day, a high-flying Pakistani or American reconnaissance aircraft or a satellite passes over Jawa. The photographs are taken, developed, and analysed. They show the telltale signature of precision: isolated, geometrically perfect craters at the most vulnerable points of the complex. The imagery is irrefutable. Copies of these photographs soon find their way, through the relentless machinery of intelligence gathering, onto the desks of Soviet advisors attached to the DRA, and from there into the secure pouches destined for the headquarters of the 40th Army in Kabul and the GRU Directorate in Moscow. Back in the Soviet border bunker, the analyst's disbelief hardens into cold, professional dread as more photos arrive. He is not looking at the results of a lucky hit or an artillery round. He is analysing a weapon system's fingerprint. The craters are too neat, too deep, and too perfectly placed for random chance. He measures the distance between impact points. He notes the lack of collateral damage. His mind, trained to calculate the tonnage required for conventional destruction, now struggles with a new formula: one aircraft, one bomb, one target destroyed. His report, when he finally writes it, must move beyond descriptive damage assessment. It must venture an explanation. The language is likely cautious, technical, but the conclusion is inescapable. The strikes on the Jawa-Kili complex exhibit characteristics consistent with the use of American-made, laser-guided bomb munitions, likely delivered by Pakistani F-16 aircraft. Accuracy exceeds known capabilities of DRA or our own tactical aviation in theatre. This assessment is the true turning point. The explosion at Jawa was a tactical event. The circulation of this analysis is a strategic detonation. It confirms the Soviets' worst theoretical fears as concrete battlefield reality. The technological edge they had monitored from a distance is now here, in their theatre, used against a target they themselves had failed to neutralize. The sanctuary they could not touch has not just been touched, it has been dismantled with a finesse they cannot match. The shock is no longer one of surprise, but of realization. The rules have changed, and they are holding the old rulebook. The war has entered a new phase where a single bomb, guided by an invisible light, can achieve what entire regiments of artillery could not. The initiative, already slipping, has now been seized by a method of warfare for which they have no immediate answer. The precise craters at Jawa-Kili were not merely holes in the ground, they were fault lines that fractured the tactical landscape of the war. The Soviet military, an institution built on doctrine and procedure, was now forced into a reactive, costly, and often futile air game of catch-up. The most immediate Soviet response was a frantic effort to harden and disperse. Across Afghanistan, at command posts, airfields, supply depots, and other high-value fixed sites, engineers were put to work. Concrete grew thicker. Earthen berms were raised around sensitive structures. The goal was no longer just to withstand a barrage, but to survive a direct hit from a single, precisely placed bomb. This defensive fortification campaign consumed vast quantities of manpower, material, and logistics, resources already stretched thin. It was a tax imposed by the mere existence of the new threat. For the VVS and their frontal aviation regiments, the pressure intensified. The Stinger had already compressed their operational envelope, forcing them to fly higher and faster to survive. Now, the laser-guided bomb introduced a new spectre. Their own fixed bases were vulnerable to the same precision. The security of the sanctuary had been inverted. Soviet pilots returning from missions now looked at their own hardened aircraft shelters with a nagging doubt. The psychological burden, already heavy, gained a new dimension of vulnerability. Tactically, the Soviets attempted to develop counters, but each was fraught with limitation. Electronic warfare was explored. They understood laser guidance could be jammed or spoofed, but fielding mobile, effective laser warning and countermeasure systems in the rugged Afghan terrain against covert, fleeting designators was a monumental technical and logistical challenge. It was a solution for a conventional front line, not an invisible beam lancing from a random mountainside. Their most direct and aggressive response was an escalation in intelligence and interdiction efforts. Spetsnaz reconnaissance teams and K-Ishad, Afghan secret police agents, were tasked with a new priority: find and eliminate the laser designation teams. This meant deeper, riskier patrols and a hunt for specialized equipment and training among the Mujahideen, a needle in a haystack mission. It also led to increased violence against the civilian population in border areas, as suspicion fell on anyone who might harbour or support these technical teams, further alienating the populace and fueling the insurgency. Perhaps the most telling repercussion was the shift in Soviet offensive planning. The failure of their own massive conventional assaults on Jawa, contrasted with the devastating success of the pinpoint raid, highlighted a grotesque inefficiency. Plans for similar large-scale operations to clear other border sanctuaries were quietly shelved or scaled back. Why commit regiments to a bloody mountain battle when the enemy could achieve deeper strategic effects with 2 aircraft? This realization was corrosive to the military's operational confidence. The initiative had decisively shifted. They were now in a position of reacting to enemy capabilities, not dictating the terms of battle. For the Mujahideen and their patrons, the raid was an unqualified tactical and propaganda triumph. It proved the Jawa complex could be crippled. More importantly, it provided irrefutable proof of concept. The pipeline of precision soon expanded. More paveway kits flowed in. While never as ubiquitous as the Stinger, laser-guided bombs became a specialized tool for high-value targets, bridge pylons, key headquarters, and other hardened points. The Mujahideen's arsenal now spanned from the ancient, the Lee Enfield rifle, to the cutting edge of Cold War technology. They were no longer just guerrillas, they were a hybrid force, capable of delivering a level of tactical violence that matched, and in precision surpassed, their superpower foe. The battlefield had been permanently altered. The Soviet soldier now fought not only an invisible insurgency, but also the looming threat of a single, perfect strike from the sky, a threat that rendered even the strongest walls feel temporary. The cost of maintaining their occupation had just been recalibrated, and the meter was running faster. The tremors from Jawakili did not stop at the tactical level. They travelled up the chain of command, through the fortified walls of the Soviet Ministry of Defense in Moscow, and into the Politburo itself, delivering a profound strategic shock. This was not merely the loss of a single base, it was the collapse of a key strategic assumption that had underpinned the entire war effort. The core assumption had been that geography and sovereignty provided an immutable shield. The Duran Line was a political barrier the USSR chose not to cross in force, and they calculated that their adversaries, bound by the same rules of statecraft, would not cross it either with overt, conventional military power. The F-16 raid shattered this illusion. It demonstrated that the United States and Pakistan were willing to escalate to a new level of covert action, one that used a sovereign nation's regular armed forces in a deniable strike with strategic weapons. The sanctuary was now a kill box. This redefined the strategic depth of the conflict, exposing every Mujahideen camp and logistics hub in Pakistan to potential surgical annihilation. The Soviet Union's primary strategic problem, the cross-border supply chain, now had a potential counter, and it was one they could not legally or politically replicate. Financially, the implications were staggering. The Soviet war effort was already a hemorrhage of resources. The CIA estimated the total cost to the USSR at billions of rubles annually. The introduction of precision strike capability forced a massive and ruinously expensive reassessment of force protection. The cost of hardening every potential target in Afghanistan and along the Soviet border itself was incalculable. It meant more engineers, more concrete, more air defense units stretched over a vast hostile territory. Every ruble spent on passive defense was a ruble not spent on offensive operations or on a Soviet economy already showing fatal signs of strain. The laser-guided bomb, in essence, became a weapon of economic warfare, exponentially increasing the opportunity cost of the Soviet occupation. Within the Soviet military and intelligence apparatus, the raid triggered a crisis of assessment. The GRU and KGB faced searing questions. How was such a significant operation not detected in advance? Why were the capabilities of the Paveway F-16 combination so grossly underestimated in the Afghan context? The failure was systemic, a blend of doctrinal blindness, analytical rigidity, and perhaps a reluctance to deliver unwelcome news about a revolutionary threat. Careers were likely damaged. More importantly, trust in the intelligence feed from Afghanistan was compromised. If they could miss this, what else were they missing? This internal shock manifested in the changing language of Soviet military reports and leadership discussions. High-ranking officers began to speak privately of the war as a bleeding wound, a phrase that would later become public. The precision strike at Jawa provided a concrete, classified example they could point to. This is why we are losing. This is the future we are not prepared for. Most critically, the event fed directly into the political reassessment underway in Moscow under the nascent policy of perestroika and glasnost. The Jawa strike, and the demonstration of a relentless, technologically advancing enemy that could strike with impunity, strengthened the hand of those arguing for withdrawal. It provided a stark military justification for the political decision. Not only was the war morally corrosive and politically damaging, but it was also becoming militarily unwinnable against an adversary whose key supporters could project precision violence in ways the USSR could not effectively counter. The strategic shock, therefore, was the convergence of military reality with political will. The pinpoint accuracy of the bombs over Jawa did not just collapse tunnel entrances, it collapsed the last pillars of the Soviet argument for a prolonged, winnable counterinsurgency. It proved that time was not on their side, that the technological trajectory favored their enemy, and that the cost of staying was about to become infinite. The dust settled over the precise craters at Jawa. The Soviet advisors filed their reports, the Pakistani pilots debriefed in quiet hangars, and the Mujahideen began the long work of digging out. In the grand, bloody chronology of the Soviet-Afghan War, the raid was a single, sharp spike on the graph, a tactical event. But its true significance was not measured in tons of collapsed rock. It was measured in the silent space of a shattered assumption. For decades, the calculus of aerial warfare had been one of probability and mass. Destruction was a statistical guarantee purchased with volume. The laser-guided bomb introduced a new arithmetic, certainty, purchased with precision. Jawa was the moment this abstract principle became an inescapable battlefield truth, not in the controlled skies over Vietnam or the test ranges of Nevada, but in the heart of a live, brutalizing conflict between superpower and insurgency. The Soviet generals' disbelief was the human symptom of a profound historical pivot. They were witnessing the obsolescence of their own doctrine in real time. The industrial age paradigm of warfare, which they had mastered and which had won their great patriotic war, was being supplanted by an information age paradigm. In this new model, the key factor was not the weight of steel delivered, but the fidelity of the data guiding it. The bomb was merely the payload, the laser beam was the command. This shift from brute force to networked intelligence would come to define the decades that followed, from the deserts of Iraq to the mountains of the Hindu Kush a generation later. The raid also redefined the very geometry of conflict. It erased, in one stroke, the strategic value of a hardened, fixed sanctuary. It demonstrated that sovereignty and topography were no longer absolute defenses against a committed adversary wielding precision. This lesson would echo far beyond the Duran line, forever altering how states and non-state actors would think about security, vulnerability, and the projection of power. Ultimately, the story of Jawa is a parable about the pace of change in war. The Soviet military was not ignorant or primitive, it was simply institutionalized, optimized for a previous kind of conflict. Their failure was one of imagination, an inability to conceive that the delicate technology of precision could thrive in the chaos of a guerrilla war, and that their enemy could wield it with such effect. The pinpoint accuracy that baffled those generals in 1986 did not end the war. The Soviet withdrawal would take 3 more years of grinding conflict, but it severed a vital artery of hope for a military victory. It made the cost of staying quantitatively clearer and qualitatively more terrifying. In the silent photographic evidence of those perfect craters, the Soviet high command saw a future they could not control and a war they could no longer win. The age of precision had arrived. And in the mountains of Afghanistan, an empire began to count its losses, not in territories held, but in the unbearable exact price of holding them.